welcome to this live broadcast brought to you by Zim Papers Television Network ZTN in partnership with the Vendors Initiative for Social and Economic Transformation, VISAT. I'm Blessing Munatsi. In our program today, we would like to probe the impact of COVID-19 on the informal economy in Zimbabwe and also Southern Africa, with particular emphasis on policy responses. Today's show is, of course, the second in a series of ongoing discussions revolving around the Informal Sector Voices. And to help me explore today's topic, I'm joined in studio by Samuel Wadzai, Executive Director for the Vendors Initiative for Social and Economic Transformation, VISAT, as well as His Worship, the Mayor of the City of Harare, Councillor Herbert Gomba. Also joining us today will be other guests via telephone. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Now, during the course of today's show, we will also be joined via telephone by Tariro Defni Senderai, a lawyer who is with the Zimbabwe Council of Churches, ZCC, and also Dr. Godfrey Kanyenze, the Director of LEDRIS, that's the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe. Now, Samuel, we continue on our journey to demystify the perceptions around the vendor. Looking at the percentages of the informal economy, what are the contributions in terms of the informal sector in Zimbabwe and also in Southern Africa?
Okay, thank you, Blessing, and once again we appreciate the opportunity to be here. So in terms of percentages in Zimbabwe, over 95% of the population is surviving through the informal economy. And it is also important to note that of that percentage, the majority, over 65%, are women in this sector. In terms of Africa, over 86.5% of the population in Africa is surviving through the informal economy. One way or the other, they're employed through the informal economy. And focusing on sub-Saharan Africa, over 82.2% of the population is surviving through the informal economy. But what is striking in Zimbabwe is the fact that the majority of the youth that are being churned out of universities and colleges are finding themselves into the informal economy. As an organization, we've managed to craft response strategies, and we have developed and incorporated a specific department which deals with those that are being churned out from the colleges and universities. And these are called graduate vendors. And the aim was to ensure that we prepare them as they leave colleges to come and join the sector. Over 60% of players in the informal economy are the youth. So we felt that it's very important to prepare them so that they have all the information that they need. They have got all the nurturing, and the networks will be readily available for them to come in and contribute to the development of the economy. And yeah, it's an exciting project. That
now, when you call them graduate vendors, are we not limiting them? Aren't they just entrepreneurs, firstly? And then secondly, when you say 95% of the people rely on the informal sector, do we have an intersect of sorts, that maybe someone is working and they're also in the informal sector in one way or the other? Absolutely.
I mean, like I indicated previously, you find that one would be formally employed, but because the income is not sufficient enough, they will be complementing whatever that they are getting from their formal jobs with informal activities. I gave an example that probably 6% of staff complemented this institution will be doing some informal activities just to complement their income. And we know that the majority of the people in this country are surviving through that means. Then when it comes to calling them graduate vendors, I mean, we believe that it's a process. It's not an event to become an entrepreneur. You first accept where you are. If you are a vendor, you're a vendor. You can grow to become an entrepreneur. And it's deliberate that we call them vendors, because we know that ultimately our thrust is to ensure that we assist them to grow. We link them. We create the opportunities for them you know, to interact with the big businesses and to become macro entrepreneurs. And I'm excited to say that over 40% of those that we have been working with have managed to grow, and they are contributing effectively, and not only to the development of the economy, but even to the sustenance of the organization VSET itself.
Now, Councillor Gomba, we're looking at the effects, obviously, of COVID-19 in the wake of the disaster that we're trying to contain. What are some of the policy responses that the city of Harare is actually implementing in line with the COVID response?
Yeah, thank you so much. As you know, government set out a statutory instrument that was announced by the president, to which he then said people should be able to understand and practice social distancing, and certainly must be able to do certain requirements in tandem with the statutory instrument. And as council, we were then called upon to make sure that initially we were told to close our markets. Then we were told to open from 8 to probably 3. Then we were told to make sure that anyone who is entering the markets should be sanitized, and certain hygienic behaviors must be undertaken when you are inside there. So this is what we were doing, and during the same time we discovered that probably we also need to be able to make sure that we take that as an opportunity for us to be able to avail spaces for our people to be able to trade in, and we therefore moved in with speed to create the Coca-Cola. The Coca-Cola market was put under a program of renovation, and structures were being put up. Then we said we should move to Shawasha, where we are trying to look at how we can accommodate them, taking advantage of this program that was taking advantage of the COVID period that we are in. Yes.
Now, just from that point that you raised, I just want you to clarify two areas. The first one, the whole initiative to clear illegal spaces, is it the initiative of council, or it's an order from your parent ministry? That's the first one. And then secondly, do you feel that the new areas that you're developing will be able to cater for the number of vendors since they're quite numerous?
We received a directive that came from the parent ministry that in it, if you read it, you can then understand it, that was also coming from a cabinet decision that was made to say we must be able to clear vendors who are selling their wares at illegal spaces. So we worked together with JOC, and certainly the ministry was playing an oversight role. Yes, that was more to do with those that were on illegal open spaces. But those that were on spaces that we designated, we moved in to clean, to sanitize, disinfect, etc., and to remark, so that when people are coming back, they would see a situation that is totally different to what they were in terms of the status of the facility. Yes.
So carry on, sir.
And our concern was to also deal with not only illegal trading, but also there was rampant seizure of our markets by space barons who were collecting from our markets. And I subscribe to the notion that vendors are playing a critical role in the sustenance of the economy and in the growth of the economy. However, it must be known that growing the economy starts with transactions amongst those that are facilitating your trading. And in this regard, I mean to make reference to the local authority. When you want to grow your economy, you start with growing the local economy. That is to contribute towards the development of the local economy. Then the local economy then contributes to the development of the whole, which is the country. On that regard, then you would consider that certainly we must be able to deal with issues of space barons, so that then that which is supposed to come to the local authority must come, so that we can develop our country from the local to the national.
You touched on an issue that I really was going to highlight, the issue of space and land barons. Yes. Can you clarify for us, are these bogus council officials, or are these people that are not related to council whatsoever? Because you have been on record calling for the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission to come in and actually investigate.
Yeah, but before I answer to that, I would also want to be able to answer to your first question, that do you have enough space to be able to accommodate?
Is the space sufficient?
Yes. Space isn't going to be enough, because our economy must be diversified, so that then we can grow the formal and the informal sector. In terms of the Regional Town and Country Planning Act, we cannot zone and change use of every open space in order to be able to accommodate vendors. We must be able to complement that which we have provided with with the growth of the informal sector, so that those that are coming from the universities are also consumed in the informal sector and in the formal sector. We have provided spaces that can amount to almost 15,000 vendors, but it's not enough. We need to be able to provide more. But we mustn't leave that to local authorities entirely. Our plans are hinged on trying now to put up buildings, structures like the Chinese experience, where vendors are not only accommodated on the ground floor, but also building up floors upward. So this is the whole idea and the changes that we are looking at as council.
Yes, I'll come back to the point of the space baron, so that you can give us that response. But Samuel, how has the COVID-19 had an impact on the informal economy? How huge is the impact?
Very huge, gigantic actually. Look, the total shutdown meant that people were supposed to stay at home, and to an ordinary street vendor, to an ordinary informal trader, it meant that you are not able to trade, you are not able to realize any income. And I can tell you that the majority of street vendors in particular, they live through hand to mouth, and it means that you are not able to put food on the table. And this had a very, very huge impact on the livelihoods of our members. But let me also add to say that we thought that the authorities were also going to come in and cushion us. I think there was communication.
There was announced, maybe $200.
Yes,
it was. Did your members benefit from that?
So what we did, nothing as yet. So what we did through the Ministry of Women Affairs and SMEs Development was to update our databases so that everyone who is supposed to benefit from this fund gets the opportunity to benefit. And we were given, I think at maximum it was about a week and a half, to do a relook on our databases so that we capture all the names of those that are eligible, those that can benefit from the fund. But it's disheartening to note that up to now, nothing is, has materialized in terms of getting those cushioning funds.
Where is the stumbling block, really? Because the turnaround time needs to be shorter. The people need the assistance now. Where is the stumbling block?
I think the ministry, the government would be better placed to answer that, because on our part as informal sector associations, we delivered, we submitted the databases that we were requested to submit, and we did that almost close to a month ago. And we thought that given the precarious nature of the situation, we thought that the government was going to expedite this process so that people can be able to survive. And mind you, it also have got an effect in terms of the effectiveness of this whole lockdown. You cannot expect me to continue to be staying at home when I'm seeing my kids, you know, literally starving. And I think personally, I think that the government can do better, you know, and assist the vulnerable of our society, so that all the people are prepared to adhere to the guidelines that were put in place by the government. That's the first point. The second point is that all the borders were closed, and it means we are unable, you know, to restock. Most of our members rely on, you know, imports. They rely on South Africa.
Come through, because if the numbers do then start going up again, we will be then prepared. Coming back to you, Sano, what are the proposed measures targeting the informal economy right now? What do you have planned?
Okay, so like I indicated the previous time, we are currently implementing a response plan, a COVID-19 response plan as an organization, where we are complementing the work that local authorities are doing, and the government, including educating our members on the importance of working from clean domains. But we've also taken advantage of this period to come to develop proposals for the decongestion of markets, not only here in Harare, but in other municipalities throughout the country. And we hope that this is an opportunity for us to assist each other, to work, to collaborate with our authorities, policymakers, and everyone. And I think as an organization, we have tried to take the lead to do that. And we are in the process of finalizing on how we can assist the Harare City Council in particular to renovate the Lusaka fresh produce market. And I think we had the opportunity to visit that place with the town clerk and other departmental heads.
All right, this is the program Visit Informal Sector Voices, Vendors Initiative for Social and Economic Transformation. That's VISAT, bringing us the Informal Sector Voices. I am joined right now on the line by Dr. Godfrey Kanyenze, the Director of LEDRIS. Dr. Kanyenze, good afternoon.
A very good afternoon to you, Blessing.
Right, Dr. Kanyenze, how much revenue does the informal economy contribute to Zimbabwe's economy, and what is the trend in the region?
Well, for Zimbabwe, one would note that the informal economy is the economy, which is accounting for, according to the IMF study of 2018, 61% of our gross domestic product. And also, according to the latest 2019 labor force survey that has just been released by the Zimbabwe Statistical Agency, 76% of the 2.9 million people that are formally and informally employed are actually holding down informal jobs. So it's such a very crucial, critical sector in the sense that that is essentially the economy of Zimbabwe.
I know your organization is very much research-based. These figures that you're giving us, 61% of GDP, this is based on actual research, because it might be a bit difficult to measure, isn't it?
Well, yes, but the 61% I've referred to is from an International Monetary Fund study, which was released in 2018 on what they called shadow economies in the whole world. So Zimbabwe was considered to have the third largest shadow economy in the whole world after Georgia and Bolivia. So you can imagine that we are up there in terms of the extent of informalization of the economy.
Now, as you speak there, from your assessment, to what extent has the COVID-19 actually had an impact on the economic growth projections for Zimbabwe and also the SADC region?
Well, it already has a huge impact. Firstly, there are two transmission mechanisms. The impact of the health aspect, and then the impact in terms of the measures that government undertook, for example, the extended lockdown and now the sort of like easing that is happening in stages, that is having a huge impact on economic activity in the sense that the majority of the economy and also including the informal economy have not yet resumed economic activity. So that has got a massive debilitating impact in the sense that if you look at the informal economy, its very nature as a livelihood sector, as a social protection mechanism where people live from hand to mouth, the impact is quite devastating because if you can't go out a single day, the whole family is destroyed.
Most definitely. And as you say that, obviously the informal economy has been impacted quite hugely, but can we quantify this maybe in dollar terms?
Well, it has been very difficult to begin to quantify because we are shooting a moving target. And we haven't really reached the peak of the pandemic. South Africa has indicated that they are anticipating that would happen around September. So we are just watching, especially this period that we are entering the cold, season, June, July. That's probably when we are going to have the potential of co-infections with influenza and other diseases. So in essence, we haven't really seen the eye of the storm. So that's why it's too early to come up with a number, a bold number to say this has been the impact. But we can already feel it in terms of food insecurity because as I've indicated, if you lock out someone from the informal economy from going out to work, basically that really impacts on them because they live from hand to mouth. So essentially they would need a lot of emergency relief. That's why you see the Ministry of Labour has been trying now to identify those households, even in urban settings, that are in need of even food, basic food support.
That's very true because the value chain obviously has been disrupted. Now, looking at the 2010 government adopting the National Employment Framework, putting employment at the center of policy issues, are we on track as far as social dialogue is concerned?
Fortunately, interestingly, we are the ones, the leaders that actually developed the National Employment Policy for Zimbabwe. We were commissioned by the ILO and government to do that. So I can tell you really that we haven't really implemented it at all. If anything, we have experienced the opposite in the sense that the economy has continued to deindustrialize and informalize. So a lot of people are continuing to lose jobs. As you already know, last year was particularly difficult in the sense that we experienced a negative 6.5% growth of the economy as a result of the drought and also cyclone, Idai. So essentially, we are coming from a crisis, and then we are entering into another crisis. As of December, almost 8 million Zimbabweans were already in need of food assistance. So in essence, basically, the pandemic is worsening what was already a very critical scenario, especially if you also consider the instability within the economy. If you look at one measure of instability, inflation, as it March, it stood at 676%, up from 540% in February. So you can already see that apart from the issue of access of food, the price of food itself is also making it very difficult for ordinary Zimbabweans to access it.
How can we bridge this gap that you're talking about? Because obviously the social dialogue has not been taken down in terms of going down to the lower structures and actually implement it. Do we need then to stimulate our productivity more to close this gap?
Yeah, absolutely. If you see what almost every other country is doing, they are actually coming up with the stimulus packages. The idea of a stimulus package is to recognize that this is a superior intervening force that is normally referred to as an act of God beyond government, beyond any one of us. So we need really to come up with the extraordinary measures. That's why you see in America, in South Africa, in all countries, governments are coming up with stimulus packages that also include the informal economy. For example, if you look at what South Africa has done, they've even gone down to the community level where people have got normally access their basic foodstuffs through what they call spaza shops. We in Zimbabwe call them tuck shops. So at every household, say in the townships, you may have someone who has got a tuck shop. So the government has even assisted in terms of capacitating these plaza shops to ensure that people do not just move everywhere in search of food, so that they can actually access whatever foodstuffs they need very close to where they live. So essentially, the issue of social distancing, the issue of capacitating the informal sector providers. So that's why the informal economy becomes very handy, because it's close to the community. It is within the community itself. So that's very important for us to begin to reimagine how we can reactivate and assist even the informal economy itself, so that it can act as a form of relief for the majority of communities that can easily access it, because it tends to be very accessible in terms of being available where people are.
As you speak, I'm seeing that the informal sector is a real opportunity for us to bounce off in terms of our economic outturn. Does the current environment, give much incentive for the informal trader to even formalize? Because right now, someone can just go without even paying taxes. Is there an incentive for them to actually formalize?
The challenge basically at the policy level is that at best we've been very ambivalent. We are not very sure. At times we attack them, we see the destruction of their infrastructure, etc. Other arms of government may be trying to promote them, etc. So we haven't had a coherent, consistent policy in terms of the informal sector. I think it's time we recognize that it's critical. And hence the International Labour Organization in 2015 came up with a recommendation 204 on transitioning informality to formality, which is exactly what you are talking about. The idea basically is like what was seen in, for example, Bulawayo. Bulawayo has been very interesting. They've been registering them. So the city of Bulawayo has been receiving has been charging the informal economies players because they are registered. So essentially, that's one way of beginning to formalize them. We need to organize them like what Visit is doing and others, the various organizations that have emerged in the informal sector, to organize them, to capacitate them, to begin to change even the mindset so that they don't see themselves as a sector that is just there to make ends meet, but as a business, to transition them so that they begin to think as a business, they begin to operate as businesses. They are also capacitated and assisted in terms of accessing capital, accessing skills, accessing business development services on how to run a business, etc., linking them to what you already referred to, the value chains of the formal sector. If you look at the formal sector in Zimbabwe, more than 50% of its business is actually with the informal economy. So the impact that is there on the informal economy will also
spill on to the formal
sector because of the linkages within this sector.
Now, some of your research has also looked at sustainable human development in Africa. What are some of the findings that came out of that, and are there any best practices that Zimbabwe can actually take from the research?
Just as well, I was asked to do a paper for Sub-Saharan Africa on this very issue of transitioning from informality to formality. Because elsewhere on the continent, the level of informality is almost as high as what we find in Zimbabwe. Almost 3/4 of the people that are employed are actually eking out a living in the informal economy. So one of the things that we've been doing with the ILO in Southern Africa is to assist the governments develop national employment policies where, for instance, we promote the promotion of linkages between the formal and the informal sector, so that the formal sectors, the big businesses, can actually take up the informal businesses and begin to mentor them and begin to integrate them into their value chains and channels, so that as they grow, the informal sector also grows and also improves its business acumen. So essentially, one of the issues also involves the extending, for example, social protection, like NASA has been thinking about doing this, extending social protection to also the informal economy. But however, given the irregularity of the incomes in the informal sector, you also ensure that their payments are not regular. So you come up with unorthodox ways of ensuring that they contribute without basically them being de-linked from the social protection system. So these are some of the issues that are being discussed, organizing the informal sector itself into associations so that they can take advantage of economies of scale, so that they don't operate as they normally do as individuals.
And maximize on their contribution. Now, you touched on social protection. I'd already highlighted the issue of social dialogue. This forms part of the 4 pillars that you are quite passionate about as LEDRIS. You seek to strengthen the other 2 pillars, being employment creation as well as workers' rights. Where are we in terms of these 4 pillars? I know we'd covered social dialogue in length. Maybe the other 3, social protection, workers' rights, and employment creation, in line with the informal sector.
The informal sector is not covered by social protection, the form of social protection mechanism. That's why I think we are talking about mooting with the NASA, the idea of extending this as Tanzania has done. Tanzania has gone to its informal economy to basically include it so that they can also contribute to the social protection and also benefit from social protection. So essentially, this is something that we are now working on. But at the moment, as you already know, as I have indicated, Zimbabwe has been in a huge crisis, which has resulted in massive deindustrialization and formalization of the economy. Like that, we can't talk of employment creation, we can't talk of social protection. The activities are basically ad hoc of a survivalist mode. So we need now to organize it. That's why we're talking now of this formalization strategy. And VSET is actually involved also in the discussions with the Ministry of SMEs on how to basically come up with a formalization strategy that ensures that this sector, which is so critical, is not just seen as a care sector, but as a sector that can be reorganized, reimagined, so that it can actually play a critical role within the economy. Because it is already playing a critical role. But however,
we need to formalize it.
Yeah, we need to formalize it.
Dr. Kanyenze, thank you so much for joining us during today's show.
You are most welcome.
Dr. Godfrey Kanyenze, the director of LEDRIS, a research think tank that is also a member of the African Labour Research Network. Samuel, many points to take home there. Social protection is quite key for the employer. Change in perceptions, around the vendor itself, and also talking about Bulawayo as a good example that we can actually spread around the nation. Where are we with these actionables?
So we tried to engage with the Minister of Labour when the new act was being promulgated to ensure that the informal economy is part and parcel of the social dialogue. We feel that with the high levels of unemployment in the formal sector, it is really important to ensure that the informal economy is there on the table, and we are also able to contribute to whatever discussions that will be happening at the social dialogue table. In terms of Bulawayo, we work very closely with our colleagues in Bulawayo, the Bulawayo Vendors and Traders Association. Last year, we had an opportunity to visit Bulawayo, just to have an understanding and an appreciation of how they've managed to do things in such an orderly manner. And I think we are moving in the right direction. I think the mayor can attest to that. We had a team from here in Harare, Harare City Council. We visited Bulawayo together with them to just have an appreciation of how they are managing to do it in an inclusive manner, and how they've managed to have everyone on board. And I think we are beginning to see the fruits of that interaction that we had in Bulawayo. I think you saw last time we were here with Mr. Chideme, and I think it's part and parcel of the processes that were initiated by that tour in Bulawayo. And let me just emphasize that some of the challenges that we are facing can easily be ameliorated by just working together, just sharing information. The noise that we made after the demolitions was basically because we did not have information about what the city fathers wanted to achieve by doing the demolitions. Here, critically, the mayor has pointed out that they also want to do the issue of space barons. It's an issue which we have been calling for as an organization, that the council need to deal with space barons.
And deal with it decisively.
Exactly.
Now, will local authorities continue to dialogue with the informal traders to find common solutions? The issue of space barons, like he says, What are you doing to protect the informal trader?
Yes, I think we are of the view that we must continue to work together for the common good of our economy, for the common good of our individual households getting some money from trading. If I would want to give you an example of Machipisa shopping center. There you had vendors trading right at the front of the pharmacies there, and out of probably 1,000 vendors there, most of them were paying to land barons, to space barons, and non-space barons. And the barons were actually interfering with our work to be able to interact with the common vendor. And I'm glad that they are here to work with us. We should be able to work together to remove the barons. Working together in such a manner that the vendor himself or herself understands who to deal with, understands that council is there to facilitate and give them space to trade. And there must be linkages between them, the organizations, which represents them, like the VSET and ourselves. In most cases, what was happening is that the vendors wanted to make sure that the barons actually wanted to ensure that council works with them at the expense of the vendors. If you look at what we collected last year, we collected 3 million RTGS from a market that is supposed to contribute 25 million. And you can agree with me or not, but our investigations have indicated that out of that which we could not collect went to barons.
Where is the inspectorate department? Because I believe maybe they should then be more frequent, in going around the different areas. If they go for too long without getting into areas, it sort of gives tacit approval.
No, it's beyond that. It's beyond that. The barons had created vigilante groups which were in the habit of beating up to be able to address that, to invoke the powers of the government to say, come and assist us. Bring JOC, bring ZRP to understand what is happening when we are actually dealing with the vendors. This is why now we moved, working together with them and us, and to recover or to recover this economy, transform this economy in a manner that is consistent to policy. If you go to the Glenview Area 8 carpentry market, you can actually see them, the bar beating up our district officers, etc., etc. And this was happening.
So who protects them? Are they politically connected?
They sometimes use their political jackets to be able to do those economic issues that I'm referring. Actually identified that one. This is a vendor who was operating at such a place, who condensed.
This is the program Visit Informal Sector Voices, brought to you by the Vendors Initiator for Social and Economic Transformation. I'm joined on the line now by policy responses that are being implemented in Zimbabwe. Do you feel that they protect the marginalized groups, especially with the special focus on
COVID-19 was to first declare a state of national disaster. I'm sure you are well aware of that, which was befitting in terms of the Civil Protections Act. falls under the ambit of a biological disaster as espoused in the Act. So this was then closely followed by government. Unfortunately, some of these measures have exposed the state of preparedness or lack thereof of government, because we see that the Zimbabwean economy is characterized by mostly informal traders. And given enough notice to organize themselves and remove their illegal vending stalls, which were then raised down and they were distracted. That was during the lockdown, I think, and this happened had to abide by the regulations that have been put in place in the lockdowns, and hence their sources of livelihood, they are watching them slowly vanishing before their eyes. That includes informal traders are pushed further to the margins of the economy, and lockdowns do not make it any better. Also, the continuous increase of prices, basic commodities during the lockdown, especially for food and electricity itself, service providers are hiking continuously the prices. Then we also see that there are some policy inconsistency here and there on minor things, but then that then also said to be 100 people. When you look at statutory instrument 102 and 103 of 2020, then we see that there is the psychosocial impact of the is characterized by increase in stress, anxiety, depression, agitation, hopelessness, because it seems as though
looking at the women and the youth in particular in the informal sector, what measures can then be put in place to make sure that these
in terms of the groups of the women and young people, so I will not go through that. But I think the measures put in place to protect these groups should be driven by the need to preserve life, number one. They must also respond to the immediate needs of the people, number two. And then there's also need to reduce the gravity of by young people and women. Number two, there's also need for the government to assist in the formalization of these small businesses. I'm sure Dr. Kanyenze spoke consistently about formalizing these enterprises. There is need to formalize them, but government must assist in that process of formalization of the small businesses that are owned predominantly by women and youth. Then there is need to establish a proper feedback mechanism that is accessible to these two groups. And furthermore, there's also need to engage them continuously in a meaningful manner in policy formulation and decision-making affecting their sector. Then there's also need for Zimbabwe to invest and unveil funds for comprehensive research to establish the proper situation and possibly the practical solutions to cushion the informal sector actors. Then there's also need for allocation of a quota specific for young people and women in every resource allocation in the context of COVID-19, now and beyond COVID-19. Then there's also need for continuous awareness raising and education of informal actors on issues around COVID-19 so that they abide with the measures put in place to mitigate the spread of this pandemic, whilst at the same time they are effective in operating their individual businesses. Then, as noted above, you realize that women and youth comprise mostly of the informal sector, and to note is that the current government proclamations and measures that have been put in place actually don't favor the informal sector at all. So there may be need to review this position as a matter of urgency. And the informal sector comprises of mostly women who can't even afford the measures required in order for one to open up their small business in the context of COVID-19. And lastly, I think the recommendation I would also give to cushion and to protect these groups is that there is need to adopt a favorable approach that will assist the informal sector to put in place COVID foolproof measures that include PPEs, testings and thermometers and the like.
Now, looking at Zimbabwe, what lessons can we learn, especially from the region, when it comes to putting in place legal instruments that will actually protect the citizens, looking at social protection?
All right. I think the lessons that can be learned from other jurisdictions, particularly with legal instruments in terms of protecting citizens in such a crisis, the first one would be an inclusive legal framework must be put in place that is ahead for protection and not as a reaction measure. We have seen that there seems to be a trend where we are more reactionary than trying to safeguard or to protect the citizen first in terms of the legal framework that we put in place. So this legal framework must be inclusive and it must actually seek to protect rather than to react to the current situation. Number two, Zimbabwe's economy is characterized by a very high level of corruption, and this corruption must be comprehensively addressed for Zimbabwe to move forward. There's no need for half measures in addressing this corruption, because when we are in a crisis such as the one we are in right now, corruption will affect definitely every facet of life in the effectiveness of fighting against COVID-19. There's also need for Zimbabwe to revise its health systems, obviously, so that it will be able to meet the demands of the diseases that may be of the nature of COVID-19 or the ones that we may even foresee in the future. Then there's also need for our country to adopt a more participatory approach where citizens are involved from the onset, from the beginning up to the end. It's about inclusivity. We don't need to leave anyone behind. Then we can't overemphasize the importance of investing in a national research framework that is constantly assessing the environment and the possible risks and the proposed measures in the event that something like COVID-19 befalls our country, like right now. And we also need to strengthen our own domestic resource mobilization systems such that we are not reliant on other countries for assistance in terms of production. So I think this is the moment where Zimbabwe should be forward-looking, inward-looking, and see that it's a window of opportunity for us to start with mobilizing our own resources domestically and realize that we don't need to lean on another country or another jurisdiction for us to survive. Then when faced with pandemics such as this one, there is need to put national interests above political interests, as this is not the time to capitalize on the situation by pushing political agendas ahead of saving the lives of the general populace. And I see with other jurisdictions that probably with us, we may need to think through policies that we put in place, measures that we put in place to ensure that we implement policies that suit the Zimbabwean context. No one has a monopoly over ideas. I think that's a fact. And we cannot possibly be seen to be always copying and pasting what is happening in other jurisdictions all the time.
A policy framework that is tailor-made for the local solutions.
In Zimbabwe. Exactly. So we need to understand that our context and formulate policies that are a square fit for our context. I think with that said, I end here with my submission.
Tariro, thank you so much for coming through. I just want to give the Honourable Mayor a chance to make a response. He almost jumped out of his chair. Councillor Gomba.
Yeah, my worry with the submissions is that, including the submission made by Dr. Kanyenze, is that they also did not consider the capacitation of local authorities for them to be able to provide spaces for the vendor. Now, they spoke about the need to be able to do something for the vendor, to be able to do something in terms of policy. But I think it's also important that we look at where they are actually trading. Right now, COVID has also affected the ability of local authorities to be able to respond, to be able to move out and build more facilities for our vendors. So if we don't address that, if nothing like a Marshall Plan comes our way, yet we have not been receiving any resource for 2 months, then the vendor is likely to come to us seeking for spaces to be able to trade, and we won't be able to provide.
That's the issue of the capacitation that Dr. Kanyenze was talking
yeah,
about,
it must
and
be
also
clear that
Tariro
local
was
authorities
talking
must
of
be capacitated.
the inclusive approach, so that you're also involved in the planning. Tariro, thank you so much for coming through to the show.
Thank you so much, Blessing, for having me. Good day.
Now, Samuel, quite a number of points raised by Tariro as we obviously head to a close. The issue of involvement, the issue of the immediate needs of the informal sector, and also the fear that they have of continuity. You know, what lies ahead for them after COVID-19 in terms of capacitation. What are the plans that you have?
Look, we cannot plan for anything without the involvement of the government. Of course, we can put in place our thinking in terms of how things should be done, but there should be an interest from the government to assist us. And I think most critically to us is that if the government is going to avail any stimulus package, that should incorporate the informal economy.
Policy recommendations that you've made to government?
Definitely, we have. We, as an organization, we developed what we called an alternative policy on urban street trading, and the idea was just to play our part in terms of assisting the authorities to see how things should be done. And I think it's something that we shared with most local authorities. I think in 2017 we shared that document with the Harare City Council, and indeed we managed to share the same document with the Minister of SMEs. And we continue to proffer alternatives. We also ran a project focusing on inclusive city planning and designing. And we did this here in Harare and in Bulawayo. We worked very closely again with the Harare City Council and the city of Bulawayo. And in all these projects, we are seeking to assist the authorities, you know, in developing inclusive policies. And we are going to continue to do that. I've already mentioned the issue of what we are trying to do in Lusaka Highfields. It's part and parcel of our strategy, as we said, that we cannot do it alone, and we cannot just look when our authorities are struggling. Where we are able to think and assist them, we will do that.
We will jump in. Councillor Gomba, the issue of health and safety in your plans, in your immediate plans, and also I just want you to comment, what is the fate of you know, goods and wares that will be forfeited in your day-to-day operations?
Yeah, before I answer to that, if you look at the 18 billion stimulus plan that was announced by government, we were left out as local authorities. If you look at capacitation, it should be a real capacitation in terms of capacitating the trader, capacitating the institution that facilitates. If we don't do that, we are actually making it virtually impossible for the local authority to respond to the demands and requirements of the vendor. If you then look at what we are doing going further, we want to open up more spaces for them. And opening up more spaces and considering the requirements of the Public Health Act, we would also want to be able to put up those that were said by our experts here. You need to make sure that the facility is able to respond to the requirements of the Public Health Act. Therefore, by opening up, we are decongesting and creating further markets that can consume more vendors. But in doing that, we also need to be able to promote triple Ps, to be able to get
sanitation and ID.
Yes, getting governmental support at a larger scale for us to be able to decentralize, make sure that vendors in Highfields are confined to Highfield. They are not supposed to travel to Mbare and congest Mbare.
We decongest.
Yes, we want to decongest Mbare by opening up a new market in Highfield, in Glenora, and to be able to accommodate more. And we are in the process of registering vendors for them to be able then to pay us online and to be able to use other modes of payments. And in doing that, we are going to work closely with them. We are going to rezone and do more in terms of rezoning, changing of uses, and etc.
What happens to goods that will be confiscated?
They are taken to the ZRP. In most cases, they are taken there and disposed. In some cases, through corruption, they are taken home by certain officers whom, if found, are supposed to be disciplined. Yes.
So, as we close, your closing remarks, and then I'll give the Honourable Councillor his chance.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a very difficult period as a country, but I think in each crisis there is a window of opportunity for people to do things correctly. And I think as an organization, I think we have demonstrated that we are prepared to work with authorities to ensure that we begin the process of putting in place policies that are human-centered, policies that have got the capacity to help us to develop the economy. And I think the informal sector is ready, I mean, to be part and parcel of all those critical processes.
Councillor Gomba?
All we are asking for our vendors to do is to make sure that they trade on designated places, to make sure that they also participate in the cleaning up of the city. Make sure that where you are trading, you are also helping us in terms of making sure that you have a bin where you put up your things, you throw your litter into that bin. And we also want them to continuously work with us to be able to refine and amend the numerous policies that we are going to be able to implement or that were there before I became mayor. This is a continuous process. We are willing as a city to accommodate them as long as they are abiding to the requirements of the policies that we promulgate as a local authority.
Certainly hope that the oneness in planning will continue. The vendors, along with the authorities, in planning and mapping the way forward for our beautiful city towards 2025. This live broadcast was brought to you by Zim Papers Television Network, ZTN, in partnership with the Vendors Initiative for Social and Economic Transformation, VISAT. Our topic today was looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the informal economy in Zimbabwe and also Southern Africa, with a particular emphasis on the policy responses. I'd like to thank my guests for today in studio. I had Samuel Wadzai, Executive Director for the Vendors Initiative for Social and Economic Transformation, as well as His Worship, the Mayor of the City of Harare, Councillor Herbert Gomba. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
We would also like to thank my guests who joined this discussion via telephone. Tariro Defni Senderai, a lawyer with the Zimbabwe Council of Churches, ZCC, and also Dr. Godfrey Kanyenza, the Director of LEDRIS, that's the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute in Zimbabwe. Many thanks to our partners, Vendors Initiative for Social and Economic Transformation, VISAT, our viewers who follow this program through our social media platforms on Facebook at Zim Papers TV Network, on Twitter at ZTN News, and also on YouTube, ZTN. Today's show was the second in a series of ongoing discussions that will revolve around informal sector voices. So do look out for next week's edition, which comes your way next week, same time. From the crew behind the scenes, remember, COVID-19 is real. Play your part and stay safe. My name is Blessing Munatsi. Good afternoon.